Franz Kafka felt himself to be an incredibly mediocre person. He had an immense inferiority complex that he didn't accomplish the normal things that he felt a young Jewish man should fulfill in his life, and that was to be a full independent man, what they would call a mensch. And that is to have a wife, to have children, to bring them up, to, provide for a woman and a home, and all those things which his father had not only done, but had done successfully and with immense dedication and hard work. And although he felt that he was, and certainly had gifts as a writer, compared to his father, who opened a business and who brought up 3 children, I think 2 sisters and himself, and a wife and a home, he felt deeply inferior. And his inferiority stemmed that he didn't have courage. He had no or very little courage in making any decision. His decisions are on the page with the pen and paper. And that's the decisions of all artists. Their decisions are artistic decisions. Once you have aligned yourself to this world where your decisions are artistic, you may find that your other decisions become, in a way, harder to make. And he couldn't make a decision. He couldn't make a decision even to meet a woman. There was a story, we had a date with a woman, I forget where it was, maybe it was in Vienna or Berlin, I can't remember. But he had a date, and so he was looking forward to seeing her. And then he had to write, saying, I don't think I can do it. Then she said, right back, in those days, mail was very fast. And, you please just come just for the day or something. He said, okay, welcome. Then he gets the train, and he actually arrives in the city. And even when he's there in the same city, he writes again saying, I don't think we should meet. And so this goes on and on, this chopping and changing, this lack of not only decisiveness, this terror of actually taking on a flesh and blood relationship, not a relationship with a piece of paper and with his mind and with a pen, but to deal with the tangible, necessary response to live human beings, to a woman, which would then put him on that path which he's always wanted to go on, to have a woman, to be married, and to settle, and to have even produce children. He couldn't. He had this sense that he was a mediocrity. Having such feelings, and they're devastating feelings for a man, or for a woman, but mostly for a man, because the man is, particularly coming from that Jewish family, it's incumbent upon the man to prove that you're a kind of worthy and courageous and normal human being that can get married, have children. Well, a bricklayer, a plumber can do that without any fear. But he had a lot of fear. So what it developed in him was an immense sense of guilt. This guilt was absolutely tore him apart. It was ruthless. He felt this guilt. He felt it on a daily basis. He felt guilt for letting down his mother, his father, letting down the various women he had relationships with. He was absolutely saturated with guilt. How could he purge this guilt? So he wrote The Trial. And the trial is about a guilty man. But the guilt of this man is his lack of courage to take a step forward and risk that. So he was guilty of inaction. He was guilty of cowardice. He was guilty of weakness. He was guilty of prevarication. And this produced The Trial, which is the most amazing book. And you may say, well, he produced one of the great novels of the 20th century. All right, so he didn't have a child and he didn't have a marriage, but he produced a great artwork. But if you asked Kafka, he would have said he would have given up 20 books to have just had a relationship, a marriage, and a child, and just some sense that he had fulfilled himself. So that guilt went into The Trial. he probably felt that when it came to it, the book was too revealing. And I think whilst he could, through the imaginative allegory of metamorphosis, show in a way kind of a fairy tale. The man imagines himself, and again it's insecurity and guilt. He is no better than an insect. But then, for having established that, he makes it quite a creative and quite very moving and tender and quite enriching story, which then could apply to anybody. I have a feeling with his papers, the trial was getting very, very close to the source. So close that it would, in a way, expose him. And he kept that with an astonishing skill he has as a writer. He kept it at bay. He kept it, in a way, covered and masked by wonderful scenes and of his attempt to seek the law, to seek freedom from his imprisonment or his arrest. And but then as it comes to the end, he gets closer and closer to Franz Kafka. And when he comes to the cathedral, he lets slip a bit. He's getting near the end, and I think he's getting weary. It's still brilliantly inventive, it's still quite wonderful, but then he starts to slip a bit, and Franz is revealed. And when the priest said to him in the church, "You rely too much on the help of women. It's not the right kind of help." And of course he did. He needed them. He couldn't fulfill them. He couldn't keep his dates. He couldn't make any kind of future plan. But he needed them around. He needed them for succour, to nurture, to look after him, to pat him, to, admire him. And he had a number of women admirers, for minor dates. He wouldn't take it much too seriously. But that gave him away. And I think he probably felt the book would reveal and expose him. Kafka had an incredible sense of humor. All people who suffer intensely develop an acute sense of irony and humor. And that is also a kind of, if you like, a heritage of the Jews living under the monstrosity of the German Nazi regime, and even before. Humor is something which they have to a very, very extraordinary degree. And they cannot write anything without humor, and maybe not so much in the Metamorphosis, although there is some even elements of humor with the lodger scene. But I don't think it's a black comedy, but there is a humorous vein running through it. And I think Wells was bold and brave to tackle such a subject. Kafka always appeals to particular men or women who are unique, individualistic, anarchistic, bizarre, who would use his work to express themselves. So I'm saying that I am, but not really. But it does attract people who have a different kind of overview of the arts than the norm, That they like. There's people who like Chekhov, and there's people like Kafka, and ne'er the twain shall meet. What Orson Welles does, he layers it with Orson Wellesian techniques, and that's kind of a layering, which is interesting, and it never ceases to be fascinating. I mean, of course, the great scene in The Office when he comes to this gigantic office which goes on forever, and that's a marvelous study of that kind of terrible, almost Stalinistic and Soviet bureaucracy, or even German, if you like, in that sense of order. So I liked it, and I thought he had some, and served by Orson Welles quite brilliantly. Served by Tony Perkins as Joseph K. He was a perfect Joseph K. It's a deep subject. It's also that it's not a kind of story that has the simple plot that people are used to in movies. Something happens, oh, there's a reason for it. Oh, he gets the girl, or he's a villain, and then there's a hero. It doesn't obey this kind of sequential event. It doesn't obey the norm that films and what film publics are used to. It's a film of wildly imaginative, bizarre, absurd. The man is guilty, nobody knows why. Audiences are very materialistic. They want a reason, and especially in America, they say, hey, what's wrong with the guy? Why, they don't follow what's going on. Wells is always ahead of his time. And the people who are ahead of their time always face the unfortunate response of neglect, hostility, and the barbs of the critics. That is the penalty you pay. Do not be ahead of your time. Be a bit laggard. Be a bit slow. Stick with the also-rans. Pander to the mediocrity. And some directors have the genius of putting their finger right on the pulse of mediocrity. Wells was not one of them. So when you're always ahead of your time, people who love him will just say, thank God. And this will pave the way in the future for films of that nature, as it did. But, that's why, anybody who's ahead of their time always has to face a difficult career and a difficult future, and then often face tremendous neglect and be posthumously celebrated.